So next, let me introduce Chief John Kratt. Chief, Peter has explained this pressure for fire and emergency services in Carefree to become part of the regional automatic aid system. We want to turn to your expertise to really understand the options and the cost if Carefree wants to be a part of that system. Could you walk us through that?
Certainly. The first slide that's up right now is a mutual aid versus automatic aid that I think Peter laid out fairly well. So I'm gonna shoot past this slide for brevity. Just a quick overview again. Mutual aid, we have to ask for help. Automatic aid, it's based on closest unit, no city boundaries play into this. It's whatever fire apparatus is the closest to the call is automatically dispatched to it.
But Chief, let me make sure, under mutual aid, it says that automatic aid partners can refuse service, right?
They can. Now, to be perfectly clear, the fire chiefs surrounding Carefree have stated that in the case of life safety, in other words, an occupant is threatened by a fire or an emergency, or the firefighters themselves are in a position where they can be harmed while battling a fire or a hazmat or whatever, that they'll respond. But as soon as that life safety component is pushed out and taken care of, they'll leave. So what that does is it puts pressure on our units that are here in Carefree presently, that now they spend the next 10 to 12 hours without much relief dealing with whatever emergency that happens to be. That puts pressure on their well-being, injuries go up, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, well, take us through the next slide that you want to.
So there's really 4 options available to Carefree. If you follow the recommendations from the committee to go to auto aid, it reduces that to 3 because, as Peter detailed, rural metro is not going to be allowed to be in the auto aid system.
Let me ask you to repeat that. If the town of Carefree wants automatic aid, rural metro is not an option.
It's not an option. But because this is a community-driven exercise, they can opt for rural metro. And we're going to include that in any of this discussion just to keep that as part of the discussion.
Okay.
All right? So any of these 4 options are going to provide excellent emergency services. The town of Carefree has been happy with the service that's been provided by rural metro over the years, and certainly the other options would provide equal or in some cases a little bit better service. We're going to break this down into the upfront costs, which we describe as the one-time costs, annual costs to operate it or operational costs, and then just a little bit about the unique service options that one or the other may have or may not have.
Okay.
Before we really talk about these numbers, I want to make one caveat to this. These are numbers that we at this time believe are pretty solid numbers. However, rural metro is under contract till January 2024. There's inflation. There's supply increases of suppliers for things like turnout gear, stuff like that. So these numbers could change. We don't feel they're going to change dramatically, but they could. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that these are exact numbers. So with Daisy Mountain, the one-time cost you can see is about $1.8 million, with an annual operating at $2.6. City of Scottsdale, same one-time cost. Annual operating costs, which turns out to be the highest of the group at a little bit over $3 million. If we start our own fire department here in the town of Carefree, it's a little higher upfront cost because we have to buy a little bit more equipment. And the annual operating cost is fairly expensive also. It's pretty close to what Scottsdale would charge us, what we believe they would charge us. Again, these haven't been negotiated. We would have to sit down with Daisy Mountain, with the city of Scottsdale, and actually negotiate solid prices.
Chief, can you explain what those one-time costs are, the costs of transition from what we have now?
Yes, and one detail in the one-time cost, you can see under rural metro there's $850,000. That's the cost of a new fire engine. The fire engine we're presently using was purchased in 2006, and it's come to the end of its serviceable life. So that $850,000 is built into each one of these one-time costs.
Thank you.
The other costs are buying some equipment that regional departments carry on their vehicles as kind of a standard. We'd have to buy, we'll get into it later, but we have to buy things like a dispatch equipment in the station to allow us to be dispatched by another entity, and on and on.
Okay.
Just the one point.
Peter, go ahead.
I just want to make that if you look at these annual operating cost numbers, you see that currently we're paying $1.85 million to rural metro. The next closest would be Daisy Mountain, which is an $800,000 increase. And then to get to a Carefree department, you'd be adding over $1 million a year in operating costs, and even more so with Scottsdale, which when the committee looked at what the 1% sales tax raised, it wasn't enough to cover the old operating cost for rural metro at $1.5 million. That's a $300,000 increase now. So if we're really seriously considering our own fire department or city of Scottsdale, we're talking about over $1 million hit to the operating expenses. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands
Peter,
that.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. What you're saying is these other options, other than rural metro, may help on the coverage issues, but they certainly don't help on the budget issues that we've been talking about already that the committee was also interested in.
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay, Chief.
And to follow up on that, but historically we've had a shortfall almost since the inception of the contract with rural metro back in 2006, every year that had to be made up by Gary General Fund
Correct.
monies. So as we move along, if we moved along with rural metro, we'd still be in that financial bind, which I'm sure Jim's going to cover later on.
Good, and we for sure will talk about that. Go ahead, Chief. Keep
All right,
going through
move on.
your presentation here.
So we have some pros and cons, and bear with me, I'm going to have to put my glasses on to be able to see these.
Quite all right.
Which with each one of these options. So we'll start with Daisy Mountain.
And
So
forgive me, Chief, remind me where Daisy Mountain is. What area do
Daisy
they cover?
Mountain covers Anthem, an area called Desert Hills, which is Carefree Highway, north of Carefree Highway, almost from Carefree's western border all the way to I-17. And now they are in the town of Cave Creek. So they essentially start right on our town border and go all the way
Thank you.
across. Each one of these options are going to have their own unique pros and cons. So at Daisy Mountain, it's a full service department. So they will essentially, under an IGA, handle all of the administrative and overhead concerns that we would have
And
or have to
IGA is
deal
a
with. Intergovernmental agreement.
Intergovernmental agreement.
Yeah. So they would handle things like human resources, retirement program, workman's comp, the new hire process, because we're going to have to hire probably around 15 new people, payroll, fleet management, and medical direction.
Okay.
On the operational side, and some of these are some pretty big components, training, which in fire service is a very big and ongoing daily exercise. So they would handle the training of all the folks that are stationed here in Carefree. Scheduling, day-to-day station management. Also, what would come with them is a full staff of administrative and operational chief level managers. In other words, they would handle all of those things like medical direction, training, all of those components. There's a perceived chance, a better chance of getting accepted into the auto aid system if we had an IGA with Daisy Mountain. They did the last two inclusions into this system, which doesn't happen very often. And so they have experience doing it, and they had a very good process bringing on Black Canyon City and the town of Cave Creek. And then economy of scale. Just the sheer fact that they have Gary, 5 stations?
Correct.
5 stations now, this would be a 6th. It reduces the cost across the board for each phase of operation.
Okay, and you've got some cons here listed as well.
Yeah, so in the cons, of course, there's going to be a cost increase. It's higher, and part of this is a con of control of cost increase for the town of Carefree.
Okay.
That would be certain items like hard goods, apparatus, you wouldn't have, things like that. However, some of those cost increases, we can't really control too much. For example, employee annual increases. If the town of Carefree went to another option or went to this option, we would have to keep pace with surrounding departments. Even Daisy Mountain has to do that, or they lose their employees and it's a constant turnover.
Sure, so what the town of Carefree gives up in its own discretion, it makes up for in being part of a bigger regional
Yeah, essentially.
coverage
Yeah,
system.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Daisy Mountain. Should we go to the next one?
Well, let me speak about one more thing.
Okay.
There's a probable 25-year commitment on an IGA with Daisy Mountain, and there's a reason behind that. The new retirement system is a 25-year retirement. It went up from 20 years. And the thought is that if you don't do a 25-year agreement with Daisy Mountain, that those employees don't feel like they're there for the long haul. And again, you get into that revolving door of employees going elsewhere to find that 25-year retirement package.
Great. I'm going to push you into the next one. I want to make sure we have a high-level understanding of the distinction between these 4 options.
Sure. Scottsdale Fire Department is the next option, and it's essentially exactly the same as Daisy Mountain. It's a full-service department, very robust department. We would, in talking to their chief, in agreement with them, we would get every service that the citizens of the city of Scottsdale enjoy through their fire department. Again, you can go through the list yourself, but it's all the same stuff in the overhead and operations. And then there's kind of a misstep on the cons. They would provide fire prevention activities for the town of Carefree, whereas Daisy Mountain, that would be a negotiated item. We're not sure if they would or wouldn't.
Okay. I take it the next one's going to be a little different.
The next one's a tough one. So to do a Carefree fire department is a big ask. A lot of details, a tremendous amount of work. It would be a very difficult option to pull off. You can do it, but there's a lot that's involved with it. So on the pros, again, we can kind of watch the costs and some of the items that we go through. We would control the day-to-day management. We'd control future capital purchases. And one of the things that I like about it is the way we work this model is the anticipation of being able to hire the rural metro employees that are currently working in the town of Carefree. If we go to an option like Scottsdale or Daisy Mountain, they will only hire firefighters, and they will take some rural metro firefighters. In our model here, for a Carefree Fire Department, we would be bringing across the captains, the engineers, and the firefighters to be able to fill out our roster and have experienced people that would be able to serve the community from day one without a whole lot of additional training.
Okay.
The cons is kind of a big list. There's a lot of unknowns. One, it would put a tremendous workload, additional workload on town staff, so we would most likely have to hire an HR person, probably a payroll scheduling type person. We don't know what the requirements and costs for the training in the auto aid system would be. We're not sure that we would be accepted into auto aid. We believe we would, but it's not a guarantee.
Understand.
When Cave Creek went through their exercise and did their IGA with Cave Creek, or with the auto aid system, they were able to reduce the initial training model from months to 11 weeks. We believe we'd be able to push our people through that same 11-week initial training program, but we don't have a guarantee on that either. And what that translates into, if we had to go to a full training schedule like they normally do, it's a lot additional cost because you're paying those employees to go to the training and paying people to train them. So big expense. Like I said, there might be a slight disadvantage applying to the Auto Aid Consortium. A little bit higher upfront cost, and it's fairly high on the ongoing cost. It's just a few dollars less than the Scottsdale option.
Chief, let me make sure the big takeaway I have from what you've just said is that if the town goes with Daisy Mountain or City of Scottsdale, it is essentially adding on a function to something that already exists, right? It's just an expansion of those services. Creating a municipal fire department is a heavy lift. It's taking the entire responsibility for creation onto the town. Is that the big takeaway here?
Yeah, well, and the creation and the maintenance of that system.
Very good.
With the other two, you write a check and they take care of everything.
Okay.
The next option would be rural metro. It's the lowest cost option. The employees are completely familiar with the town and how the streets are laid out, how the town operates, the interaction with town staff. And rural metro handles that day-to-day management, which takes a load off Gary that he doesn't have to worry about that.
And to be clear, this is to maintain the current system that's in
Yes.
place. This is not a different thing.
No, this would be an agreement with rural metro that just continues what they've been doing for years and years. So the cons on that is the inability to join Auto Aid. We've heard it time and time again that they will not ever be able to join the Auto Aid system. They don't meet the initial NFPA 1710 requirements. They're close, but they don't meet it. They don't have a ladder truck that can respond into the town.
Peter, go ahead.
NFPA, National Fire Prevention Association.
National Fire Protection
Protection
Association.
Association, which is the gold standard that all fire
They
I
departments.
was
set
going to
this-
ask you, what is the significance of that standard?
They set the standards for all facets of fire department operations, NFPA does.
So help me understand what you both just said. Going with rural metro doesn't meet the highest standard that's expected?
Right.
No, the base standard. So what
The base standard.
that base standard says that on a 2,000 square foot typical residential structure that's on fire, that they recommend that 14 firefighters arrive on the initial assignment, 15 if a ladder truck's included in that response. Rural Metro with their 2 fire trucks and their ambulance stationed here have 8 people plus the chief is 9, and then they have another fire engine that responds from about 20-25 minutes away that has another 3 firefighters on it. So they don't meet this standard.
Peter, I'm just going to come back to you for a second. Just help put this in context. Coming out of the Citizens Committee, was meeting that minimum standard, was that considered an important thing?
Well, yes. One of the most important things that automatic aid is that they follow NFPA 1710. As a minimum, each engine, a pumper engine, has to be staffed by 4 firefighters. Here in Carefree, we only staff our engine with 3. So automatically, even if the heavens opened up and automatic aid said, okay, rural metro can join, we would have to add 1 more firefighter to our truck for every shift.
Okay.
Which would add to the cost.
Which would add another $250,000 at least a year.
Okay. So I didn't mean to divert from this. I was just making sure I
No.
understand. In the rural metro option here, it was the least expensive of the things that we've looked at, but there are some, what's the word? There are some
Nuances.
Thank you. Nuances. There are some choices that are being made about the level of coverage that's being provided.
Yes. And then to continue on the last couple cons here, again, they don't have a mutual aid agreement with any of the other surrounding agencies. And they have limited capacity to respond to specialty type calls like hazmat. They don't have a hazmat team. high-angle rescue.
Ladder truck.
Well, they don't have a ladder truck, yeah. Trench rescue, things like that. And so that's what we would have to rely on, mutual aid, if they would respond to help us.
Okay. Chief, we've been talking about the pros and cons of the rural metro option. Let me ask everyone, is there any other points that you want to make on this topic?
Yeah, I'd like to make a point.
Peter.
I've been in public administration, public policy for 40 years. I can tell you that there is nothing more complicated to administer than a fire department, from a personnel point of view, for one thing. They work 24 on, 48 off. They get paid time off. They have special rules and regulations under the Fair Labor Standards Act. There's overtime, there's payroll, there's PTO, paid time off, and how to schedule that. You're dealing with a union. You're dealing with standards, you're dealing with medical direction, you're dealing with training and people. The Carefree municipal option is not easy, especially for a town that has a total amount of FTEs of 17.
We would double the amount of employees in the community at one shot.
And it's not like administering the 17 that you have now.
Correct.
They're under completely different rules and regulations.
True.
There's different safety standards. It is a big deal to take that on.
Huge ask.
Perfect. Thank you. No, that's exactly why we're having a roundtable conversation. We have to make sure we understand what we're talking about here. So thank you for that clarity.